You had an article, I believe, after they did the Waco reenactment. It was for Freedom Daily, I believe it's called, like Waco, the latest fireball.
Yep.
Could you give a quick rendition of that? Because I think it's a great story, and I think you told it better than anybody else I've seen.
Well, it's about 1 million words ago, but yeah, there was the. Okay, I was talking earlier about cover-ups, and most cover-ups succeed. Waco is one of the biggest examples of a cover-up that largely succeeded. You had the ATF launch a surprise attack on these Protestant dissidents who were a little bit unsavory and not they weren't Mensa members, most of them. A few of them were very smart. But you had the ATF launch a surprise attack on February 28th, 25 years ago, a couple weeks ago. And the ATF sold the story that the Branch Davidians had ambushed them and killed several of their members. Well, 3 or 4 or 5 years later, we find out that there was an ATF agent inside the Branch Davidian house. And 10 days before the raid, the ATF agent had gone shooting with David Koresh. Would you like to try the Sig Sauer? Sure, here's our AF-15. Let's have a good old time. And the storyline the ATF put out after the deadly raid that killed 6 Davidians, 4 federal agents, was that, there was no way to arrest him. And they knew that if they'd wanted to arrest him, they were out shooting with him 10 days earlier. And then let's look at the FBI. You had the FBI that sent in the tanks on April 19th, 1993, and had collapsed 20% of the entire building on the heads of the women, children, and men in there before the fire broke out. Before the fire. And it was part of the FBI plan to collapse that entire building. But the fire broke out, and then afterwards, as soon as the fire broke out, the FBI said, well, those people committed suicide. Nothing we could do to stop them. Yeah. And it was not until 6 years later that that evidence came out that the FBI had fired pyrotechnic devices into that building before the fire. And it didn't get 1% of the coverage of the as the FBI storyline that those people committed suicide, mass suicide. And it's, there were hearings 2 years later that talked about the FBI pumped that house full of CS gas before the fire erupted. And CS gas is made for use outside. You aren't supposed to use it inside, and children, there are not tear gas masks for children that would prevent that. So someone said that the children suffered terribly before they were killed. And they suffered terribly, most likely because of the FBI. But we don't hear about that. Now, on that Waco reenactment, John, once the pyrotechnic device story came out, Janet Reno was forced to appoint a so-called independent counsel. She chose a former U.S. Senator by the name of John Danforth, who was known as Saint Jack because of how he loves Washington and the federal government. And he was one of the few senators on the Republican side who liked the assault weapons ban. So this guy does a pseudo investigation, says, well, the government didn't do anything wrong. But there was a line in his final report which fascinated me, and I'm quoting this from memory, which isn't ideal, but it was something to the effect that he hoped that his report would help restore the faith of Americans in their government and help restore the government's faith in the people. So what you had was the independent counsel on Waco who was agreeing with government officials who basically vilified Americans for believing the government had done wrong at Waco. And this was 7, 8 years after the final attack. And there's still a lot of things that we don't know about that attack. But it's, here again, a lot of the worst government atrocities. Okay, I talked about the torture report. President Obama, when he came in, said, okay, it's a new day, we're not going to torture anymore. Okay, can we prosecute the people that made the torture policy? Nope. Can we prosecute the people that actually tortured and killed people? Nope. But as a compromise, the Obama administration did have one torture-related prosecution, but that was against the CIA official who blew the whistle and exposed the waterboarding. He was the only person sent to prison for a torture. And it's an outrage. And he's a nice guy who likes beer. So, but this is, and so the Senate did a report on this. Senate Intelligence Committee spent several years doing this. And it was finally got clearance to come out in late 2014. The Obama White House, the people on the white horse, did everything they could to block that report. Typical of Obama's preference for secrecy, which the media is almost always ignored. And in the final realm, they, you know, I think that's what, 600 pages out of 5,000 came out. My numbers aren't quite right, but the vast majority of it was never saw the light of day. And there's a lot of grisly details that we still haven't learned about the U.S. CIA torture regime. And the military torture may have been as bad as or worse. So, yeah, it's, you know, it's frustrating to see that. I mean, it's something that Bill Anderson's wrote about for many years. He's pushed the hard line. He hasn't compromised. I'm glad there's folks raising hell on this issue. It's just fascinating that it hasn't, you know, that it's so rare that there is a prairie fire of outrage. I mean, you know, it smolders here, a few sparks there, you know, 2 or 3 days of outrage, and then like, you know, okay, who's the next porn star that said Trump did her? So, you know,